there's a lot of turmoil in the early United States in the 1780s, that a lot of which points to the problem of this very weak decentralized government. For one, the economy is in shambles. Now, this probably would have happened anyway because of independence and the end of the war. The end of war, large wars, always brings about a lot of economic turmoil. But there was a general economic depression across the 13 states in the 1780s. Farm prices in particular plummeted. There was also the problem of currency. I mean, you're starting a government and a new political order from scratch. And so the currency, or one of the currencies, was continental notes. These were paper money that were paid to soldiers, and they were subject to the usual fluctuations of markets and speculation and so forth. And the value of those notes plummeted. There's also a very serious scarcity of hard currency, which is what, literally the gold standard of economic exchange in the 18th century. The other problem was that people were realizing that this decentralized Articles of Confederation government seemed to be too weak, seemed to be unable to carry out certain basic functions. So there's no executive. There's a person with the title president, but it's just an honorific title. There's no actual executive branch in this government. There's no federal judiciary as well. So the judicial order is all going to be handled on the state level. And Congress, it has some duties, as we noted, but it does not have the power to directly tax the states. It has no power to regulate commerce among the states. So states were engaging in kind of a lot of economic warfare against each other and imposing duties and tariffs and really kind of making economic activity across the 13 states very, very difficult. And as a consequence of this turmoil, there's unrest, there's anger, there's demonstrations and protests against the situation throughout the 13 states, but especially in Western Massachusetts, actually not very far from where I am right now. So in the mid 1780s, Massachusetts law required that everybody pay their taxes in hard currency. It was they weren't going to accept those fluctuating and sketchy paper money. But the problem, as we outlined, the economic depression plus the farm prices declining and the scarcity of hard currency meant that there was a wave of foreclosures sweeping across central and western Massachusetts. Farmers losing their farms simply because they couldn't pay their taxes, and they of course felt that this was a great injustice. Here's how one farmer put it under the pen name Plow Jogger in a local paper. "I have been greatly abused, have been obliged to do more than my part in the war," so he fought in the Revolutionary War, "been loaded with high taxes, been pulled and hauled by sheriffs, constables, and collectors, and had my cattle sold for less than they were worth. The great men," this is to whom he's referring, the elites of the state, "are going to get all we have, and I think it is time for us to rise and put a stop to it, and have no more courts, nor sheriffs, nor collectors, nor lawyers." So farmers in central and western Massachusetts really believe that the system is kind of stacked against them. The elites are using the levers of the economy, using the levers of the courts and the law to deprive them of their property, to grind them into poverty. All right, so farmers begin to mobilize to see what they can find a way to, through collective action, to put a stop to it. So the first thing they do a very 18th century thing. They send a petition to the state government and say, "We want you to stop foreclosures for the near term. We want you to lower our taxes," which in their eyes were much higher than they were in the eastern parts of the state. And they wanted the state to issue paper money that could be used to pay taxes. This is seen as just a way to kind of make it possible for people to hang on to their farms, get through this short-term economic turmoil. Well, Massachusetts state government, way off in the east, refuses to do any of these things. And so this inaction, this rebuffing of the farmers' demands, leads farmers to really mobilize, not just to write a petition, but to actually get organized and do things. And they called themselves, this is an important point, they called themselves regulators. So what they see themselves as, they don't see themselves as rebels, they see themselves as a corrective, right? They see that the government and political power has shifted in an unjust way, and they are going to readjust it. And re-regulate or get the political order back on a proper level. And this is how one Shaysite farmer put it. "I earnestly stepped forth in defense of this country in 1776, and liberty is still the object I have in view." So they don't see themselves as radicals, they see themselves as restorers. August 29th, 1786, armed farmers stormed the Court of Common Pleas in Northampton, Massachusetts, that's out in the western part of the state, and stopped foreclosure proceedings. So this is direct civil disobedience kind of action. And it's very much drawn from the 1760s and 1770s, you know, the Stamp Act protests and so forth. Soon more farmer groups organized and began to disrupt the similar proceedings in nearby towns. And out of this kind of collective action, a number of leaders emerge, but the one that everybody starts to talk about is this guy, Daniel Shays. He becomes sort of the object of both admiration and also rage and fear-mongering among the state's elite. So who is Daniel Shays? Well, he's born in 1747 in the town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts, which some of you may know is the starting place for the Great Boston Marathon. He's a farmer. And then also during the American Revolutionary War, he rises to the rank of captain. He serves in the Continental Army. After the war, like so many of his compatriots, he is mired in poverty and debt. And in his mind, and most of their minds, not through any bad decision-making or laziness or what have you on their part, they're getting crushed by this economic turmoil and high taxes and so on. And so Daniel Shays emerges as one of these leaders in different parts of Western Massachusetts. And authorities, this happens in most sort of uprisings, there's always many, many leaders, but there's always like authorities who are opposed to them usually finger one person, sort of build them up as the sinister leader. It becomes a way of kind of focusing the agency or the efforts of the government against the movement. So Daniel Shays is important, but he's sort of made more important by the people that oppose him. And you can see one of the disadvantages that the Shays Rebellion folks will have is that they don't control the newspapers. The powers that be control the newspapers. And you can see Daniel Shays here depicted in a very sinister manner. He's the one on the left, and one of his compatriots, Joseph Shattuck, on the right, and they are, you know, with sabers drawn and looking by 18th century political cartooning, looking pretty grim and threatening. All right, so here's a map of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and you can see right in the center is Worcester, Massachusetts, where I'm speaking to you from. But most of the action, even though there are a few incidents of court closures in the eastern part of the state, most of the action, most of the serious action takes place in the western half of the state. And so what happens is these court closings continue. In September 1786, Shays and his men prevent the sitting of the state Supreme Court. So they're not just closing local courts, they're closing the big one. And they reissued their petition, restating their demands for relief from in this current circumstance. And the state government, again, rebuffs their demands. And so Shays and his men begin to march on Springfield, Massachusetts, later in the year, December 1786, and prevented the sitting of the state Supreme Court. State Supreme Court was a circuit court, so it moved around, and they were basically following it and disrupting the proceedings. Well, the big showdown happens about a month later in January of 1787. By this point, Shays and the uprisers, the regulators, realize that the government is going to come after them with the militia. So they realize they need to arm themselves, also to deprive the militia of weaponry, sort of a 2-for-1. And they focus on the Springfield, Massachusetts Federal Arsenal, which is loaded with rifles and ammunition, or I should say guns and ammunition. But they are met by a kind of a combination of private soldiers and the state militia who know that they're coming under the leadership of General Benjamin Lincoln. And Lincoln, is much more heavily armed, much more organized, and able to scatter Shays and his men, open fire on them, and they kill 4 Shaysites and they arrest scores of them as well. So in this here's a later depiction of the standoff. And this pretty well ends Shays Rebellion as a formal organized thing, the closing of courts and so forth.